Welcome to another Unmuted. And here's a statement I want you to hear. Biden's day one actions still haunt him. Now, that statement was written by our guest today, and you are going to appreciate what he has to say. He is a fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, the senior fellow there, and he is a founding editor of the Washington Free Beacon. Matthew Continetti, welcome to Unmuted. We're delighted to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I want you to just start right there with that statement. I think that this is something that we hear a lot about from people, is their confusion and their frustration, and now their understanding of Biden's day one actions. So talk a little bit about that and the impact that saying we'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, that he was killing Keystone Pipeline, that has had on the American people.
Absolutely. Well, I think when you look at the landscape today and you see Americans very much worried about energy prices, when you see them worried about inflation, when you see them worried about what's happening on the southern border, I mean, the total humanitarian catastrophe that has happened at the southern border with, historically high numbers of illegal immigrants entering this country. And those are just the ones that we know about. I think we can trace that concern, that worry, all the way back to day one. When Biden was inaugurated in January of 2021, he and his team made a big show of all these executive orders that he was going to sign, basically undoing everything that President Trump had accomplished. And when you look at the executive orders from that day on energy and immigration in particular, you can see that his decisions on day one, as you mentioned, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, pausing leases for oil and gas on public lands in the United States, re-entering the Paris Climate Accord, which commits America to cutting our carbon dioxide emissions drastically over the next 10 years. All of that contributes to the scarcity of oil and gas in our country right now, which is contributing to high energy prices. And it's the same thing on immigration. On day one, he repealed all of the structures that President Trump put in place in order to contain illegal immigration on the southern side of the southern border. And that was the Remain in Mexico policy, our safe third-party agreements, and other measures. All that's undone, and we're living with the consequences today.
Well, indeed we are. And to so many Tennesseans that I talk with, it is incredibly confusing to them why he would want to move us from energy independence to energy dependence, and why he would focus so on diminishing our capabilities. So is it all about moving us to the Green New Deal and control?
I think that has a lot to do with it. Democrats, and especially the progressive movement, which controls the Democratic Party, is obsessed with climate change. And they sincerely believe that climate change will end civilization. Now, I think they're wrong. I think there are ways that we can deal with changes in the climate. We can adapt. We're smart. We're human beings. We can innovate. But their obsession with climate is driving them to embrace either the Green New Deal or Green New Deal Light, which basically means shutting down America's oil and gas industry. And Biden has essentially outsourced his policymaking to the progressive left. And the consequences are all around us, whether it's high gas prices, whether it's Biden's abuse of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, whether it's Biden's interest in subsidizing alternative fuels, which will not become cost effective ever, in my view. And including, by the way, they're not embracing nuclear energy, which would be the safest and easiest way to, if you want to cut down carbon emissions. So I think it's this climate obsession that's driving them to make policies that are going to make America more dependent on outside actors such
Yeah.
as Saudi Arabia and Venezuela even.
Yes, and when you mention the Saudis, I don't see how Joe Biden can get away with saying or asking, as the Saudis claim, that he's asked for a political favor, if you will, to not cut their production until after the November elections. And people say, how can he do this? How could he get away with this?
Well, it is outrageous, but it's just another example of how President Biden has mismanaged the United States relationship with Saudi Arabia. Now, look, I mean, since the 1930s, the Saudis have basically been on America's side. We've needed them in order to ensure stability in the global energy market. They're not the best allies by any means, but here you have MBS, for all his faults, is trying to clamp down on Islamic radicalism in his country, wants to modernize, wants to liberalize some parts of his society, and wants to be an ally of the United States and Israel against Iran. And what does Biden do? He has mismanaged this relationship from the very beginning. And then the expectation that you would be critical of the Saudi leader, that you would not want to meet with them, that eventually you do that weird fist bump that Biden had with him earlier this year, and then demand that, oh, don't do any production cuts until after the midterms, is incredible to me. And it just shows you too, Biden's real concern here is not what Americans are paying at the pump. His real concern here is domestic politics and preserving the Democratic majorities in Congress. The truth is, progressives want Americans to pay more at the pump. They want to make gasoline expensive because they want to force Americans into the electric vehicles, right? So it's so silly to me to hear that Biden is trying to threaten and bully or plead with the Saudis in order to get them to delay these production cuts, simply because he wants to stanch the losses that are coming the Democrats this way this November.
Let me go to your comments on the border, because when you talk about concerns of Tennesseans, inflation, crime, drugs, the open border, those are at the top of the list. And people will many times say, why can't they get this border under control? And why are we being flooded with fentanyl and with people from 150 different countries? And you just mentioned something in your opening remark about how under the previous administration, they worked to get the border under control on the southern side of the border. And it appears that the Biden administration has lost that control, and the cartels are the ones that are in control.
I think that's safe to say. And, you know, it is true that the objective of the Trump border policy was to contain the migrants before they reached the United States, right? So all of the basis of whether it was remain in Mexico or whether it was a safe third-party agreements was that you would apply for asylum to the United States at the first country you reached that wasn't your own. And then you would remain there until we got through this incredible backlog of asylum claims because of our scarce immigration judges. Well, Biden tore all that up, which means the migrants and the asylum seekers have every interest in paying the cartels as much as the cartels charge in order to get to the northern side of the Rio Grande River, our side of the border, and then declare for asylum here. And the results, I mean, are inescapable. And it's actually led American voters to now place the border very high up in their list of priorities. If you look at the latest Harvard-Harris poll, for example, you see how concerned Americans are with what's happening at the border, and for good reason. And I'll say too that, you know, this incredible pressure that the migrants have put on the border communities and the border states is now spreading to places like Washington, D.C., right, where I work, or to places like New York City, or even, thanks to some creative thinking by Florida's governor, to Martha's Vineyard. And that's made what was once a regional problem, the border crisis, and all the impacts of unchecked migration on the border, it's made it into a national problem that no one can ignore.
Yes, I say until we secure that southern border, every town is a border town and every state is a border state because of the problems that they're dealing with gangs and drugs and human trafficking and sex trafficking. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your insights, and I know that our viewers would love to stay in touch with you. Where can they find out more about your good work?
Well, thank you, Senator. They can visit the American Enterprise Institute website, aei.org, or they can follow me on Twitter at Continetti, just at my last name.
That is wonderful to know. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, you all will always find me online at Marsha Blackburn.